So ready.
Good evening, everyone. It's very loud. I call to order the Monday, July 19th meeting of the River Falls Board of Education. This meeting has been properly notified. I have one comment about the agenda, and then we will move into visitors or delegations. The agenda will stand as printed this evening with the exception of 5B. At this point, we are still looking for some more information before the board is going to be making a decision about the COVID testing option. So with that, are there any visitors or delegations who would like to address the board this evening? It's not on the agenda for a decision tonight. This is an open time for visitors or delegations, so if you would like to address the board, you're certainly welcome. If you do, please tell us your name and the school that your kids go to. And there's a microphone right over there, and that helps. Sure. This, right now, is the time for the community to be able to address the board. So anything that you would like to be able to say, this is the appropriate time. I ask you to keep your comments to about 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying. I've been a little confused. My name is Angie Krause, and I'm from River Falls. I wanted to speak tonight to oppose the COVID testing in our schools. I just believe medical procedures have no place in our schools and not even a volunteer option. There are several options parents have. Facilities for parents to take their children to get tested. I know my insurance company even covers COVID testing costs for my family under my insurance policy. So I'm just wondering why and who is recommending this action be implemented. We had no issue last year when we had no COVID testing in schools. We don't test for the flu. I know the CDC, per their website, is providing $10 billion to support COVID-19 screening testing in schools. And just because it's free, I just don't really believe that we need to adopt it. I mean, if it's not a problem, why would we bring it in our schools? Again, last year we didn't have COVID testing in our schools, and I don't really see that as an issue. Parents have lots of options to do that. And I guess I
a child is sick, to send them down to the nurse and have them tested? These are the questions I have when, you know, this arises. I'm just not comfortable with this being in our school walls. Because I know if my child were to be tested by mistake, you know, mistakes do happen, I would be very, very upset. And obviously I already touched on that. If a child is symptomatic, they wouldn't be coming to school. I just think we need to keep Big Pharma out of our schools. It's very important. And what kind of privacy issues, segregation, discrimination issues could arise from this? My other point I wanted to speak on is just how I really feel like we need to get back to some normalcy in our school by opposing all the mitigation efforts that we currently had for last year for this fall. I would like to see all those be dropped. The close contact quarantine, the testing, the cohorts, no singing or playing instruments and music, gym class restrictions, lunch and playground restrictions. You know, I talked to some parents over this summer, some of my daughter's classmates, and a lot of parents didn't really seem to know what was going on in the school as far as the restrictions. And I don't know where that falls, if that's just not being communicated to parents or if we're just not asking enough questions, but I know we weren't able to go inside some of these schools to keep, you know, people out of the schools, but I guess I just feel like there should be a little more transparency with school to school, or days at school that our children are there and we can't be in there. Sometimes we ask questions, they don't really answer us completely or thoroughly. I just feel like a lot of parents didn't really know what was going on in school and what some of these restrictions are. And I just want to know, what data do you have to support implementing COVID testing in our schools and not to ease the mitigation restrictions? I mean, I looked it up briefly today. It looks like we have 1 case per day in Pierce County. I just feel it's really important to be involving parents in your decisions that affect all the families. You know, last year we had no choice, and I don't know that you are involving parents, and I guess I feel it's really important, because I assure you there's a lot of parents that don't even know about our district possibly implementing COVID testing in our schools. The superintendent told me this optional testing will be based on science and medical advantages. A board member told me that the board will take action on this issue based on facts and scientific recommendations. I just want to know what those are. I just want more transparency instead of this generalized blanket statement of this is why we're doing this. I just feel we need a little more transparency. And the controversial PCR test is a product. It wasn't supposed to be used as a diagnostic test, especially with cycles running up to 40, and it's picking up a lot of false positives, and I just don't think we can justify bringing testing in our schools. I just feel we need to build and connect and not inject more fear. Please say no to COVID testing in our schools and reversing these mitigation efforts. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board? Please tell us your name and the school or schools that your children attend.
Jill Ewald Shane, and my daughter's going into kindergarten at the Montessori. Just kind of echoing what Angie said, please don't allow COVID testing or shot clinics in our schools. Medical procedures should not happen in school. Like she said, we have clinics, hospitals, urgent care, emergency rooms for these types of procedures. And another point, please keep medical devices, masks off our children this fall. It's enough. And if you feel you really need to vote on the COVID testing in school, please at least survey the parents, because you guys are the voice for the parents. Please listen to the parents. We're begging you at this point. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Nickum, and I don't have children in the school district, but I am a tax-paying resident. I tried to actually speak at the Hudson School Board meeting, and they wouldn't let me because I wasn't a resident. And I said, but my children graduated from your school. Doesn't that give me some kind of validity here? Didn't work. Anyway,
Well, you're welcome here.
Thank you. I pay taxes. The reason but there was a lady that spoke at that meeting, and she was very succinct, and she said, I don't want the 1619 project taught. I don't want critical race theory taught. I do not want contact tracing. I don't want masks. I don't want vaccines required. And the best thing that she said at the end of that was that she would like to have cameras in the classrooms. And I think that would be a safety issue for both the staff and the students, actually. It protects both sides. I think it's a tremendous idea. I'd love to see some discussion on that. But anyway, in the meantime, thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and I wish you all well.
Would anyone else like to address the board this evening? You're just fine, Christine.
I'm Christine Munich. I live in River Falls. My stepchildren graduated from the River Falls School District. And I teach Spanish here at the high school, and I'm also the president of the Education Association, our local teachers union. I came earlier to say hello to Lindsay and thank her for her interest in serving on our school board. But I also at this time wanted to thank the rest of our school board members, those of you who have been here for this year, because it's been a long year. And I think when you probably first ran for school board, you never thought you would be in this situation, and you would put in so many hours mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I want to thank you for that. I know when something gets really long and exhausting, it's hard to stay dedicated and do what you think is best. But through my union work, I talk to a lot of teachers. I talk to teachers in River Falls at the different buildings. But I also talk to teachers from Hudson to Menominee, from Glenwood City to Rice Lake to Ashland and Bayfield, Wisconsin. And River Falls was a shining star in our region. I think all River Falls School District employees worked their tails off to do the best we could to serve our students and to keep them safe. And if you talk to our building principals, other principals were calling them to find out, how are you keeping kids engaged? How are you keeping your student failure rate near, if not below, past averages? And I just want you to know, talking to other teachers and other people in education on this side of the state and to the north, that really we were a shining star. And so I just want to thank our board members at this time for listening, for learning, for questioning, for discussing, and for always deciding to move forward and helping us pass or approve policies and procedures that I think helped us provide many successes through an incredibly difficult year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal Halverson, and I have 2 kiddos that go to the public Montessori in town, which I love, by the way. So I just want to chat a tiny bit tonight about just a request for making masks optional for this fall and for the school year. I've worked in the dental field for 16 years, and I have to say that this past year has been alarming how many kids are coming to us with open mouth position and with mouth breathing. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to talk tonight, so this was spontaneous. But open mouth breathing, when you breathe oxygen through your mouth, you're not having your nasal hairs to cleanse the oxygen, and that's automatically going to decrease your immune system. Open mouth position means that tongue is going to be on the floor of your mouth, and you're also blocking the airway even more. The tongue's not on the palate, therefore you swallow 2,000 times a day, and that's not going to help the palate to develop. All of these kids are in the growth period. As a parent and my kids in the ortho and spending thousands of dollars on this, it is really a setback having them have to wear a mask, and it's contributing to them wanting to get more air and opening that mouth. So my request is just to make it optional. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak with the board this evening? All right, then we are going to move on to our next item, and the first thing is that we have Representative Zimmerman with us for a conversation this evening, so I invite you to come forward, please. It's our good fortune to have you, so I'll let you take a moment to get settled here. So Shannon, thank you for coming and welcome. We really appreciate your willingness to come and talk with us and listen and help us learn. We have many questions. I think as we get started here, I want to make sure to acknowledge that while we're here to talk about schools tonight, we understand that the state has many budget priorities, some that we know, like health and safety, all things COVID-related, taxpayer interests, supporting families, service members, higher ed, and that's probably just a small portion of the list. So we definitely understand that. But our focus tonight is going to be the implications of the state budget and how that plays out in River Falls. But before we get to that, I do have two things that I want to say. And the first one is that we really appreciate your individual personal advocacy to address the heroin epidemic in our state. It's a big concern. We are very concerned about what that does for students, for families, for their futures. We appreciate your work on that. We also appreciate your interest in career and technical education. That's been something that you have learned a lot about in terms of what we do here in River Falls, and we have felt a nice commitment from you on that and interest, so thank you very much. As a school board, one of our responsibilities is to advocate for our students' education and to do it with a mind toward being fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. And so as you can imagine, it's complicated for us this year to be able to understand Wisconsin state budget, and we have some questions for you tonight. So our intent is to have a really instructive, respectful, collaborative conversation and dialogue about the issues related to the state budget and the legislative process. I'm going to get us started with a bit of background, and then we have designated board members to ask individual specific questions. We'd have also time when you could ask us some questions too. Perfect. So, all right. The first topic that we would like to talk about has to do with federal dollars designated for COVID relief. So this is some background for you about our situation in River Falls. So our understanding is that the state budget substitutes one-time federal funds in lieu of permanent ongoing revenue limit increases. So I think that you know from conversations that you've had with our superintendent and with board members, we have some concerns about this, and we'd like to discuss them with you. So we have some examples to give you, just to give you a sense of how this all plays out in River Falls. So one of our concerns or our commitments as a school board is that it's a best practice in school finance management to not use one-time or non-recurring money for ongoing budgetary expenses. We don't like to do that because we know it's not a responsible thing for us to do. But one of our great pressing concerns is to make sure that we are able to provide modest compensation increases for our teachers, because adequately compensating our teachers is of fundamental importance to a school board. They are truly the heart of our district. We need to be able to attract and retain the very best teachers, which means that we need to provide an increase in compensation. It's particularly complicated for us because we are well aware, as I suspect you are, of the shrinking field of qualified educators, not only in Wisconsin, but nationwide. We know that we have to be able to keep pace with good, appropriate compensation packages. But we have to balance that, of course, with the need to manage all of the other areas of our budget that also at the same time the costs increase. So the challenge for us is that the state budget, the way that the dollars are coming to us in one-time funding, we're put in a position of needing to fund ongoing structural expenses with one-time money. And I'll tell you, we're pretty uncomfortable with that. It makes us really nervous because it goes against what we understand to be best practices. So, I also want to tell you a bit about our learning recovery plan because we are really concerned about the impact of COVID on our students in terms of their social and emotional and academic challenges. We know that these challenges have the capacity to be really large, potentially lifelong issues that these kids are going to be addressing, and we are anxious to address them now. So, our intent is to use some of the federal dollars that we are receiving to implement a learning recovery plan. We've developed this plan right here in River Falls for the needs of our students, given our particularities. It was done by a 20-member task force. The problem is this plan, which we need to implement right now, is on hold. This plan would include strategies to support research-based initiatives regarding reading and mathematics, mental health support for our kids, professional training so our teachers have additional support with their work, as well as other short and long-term student-centered recovery efforts. We wanted to pass this plan in May. It's now July. We're still not passing the plan because of the uncertain and inadequate state funding that we're receiving. So that's some background, and Todd has the first question.
So, thank you. The question, I guess, that we've been kind of curious to know is, as a member of Joint Finance Committee in planning for the next budget cycle, which would be 23-25, is it reasonable to expect that the committee would support, as part of the budgeting, essentially a catch-up for the one-time money that we would be losing this year if there had been a regular, say COVID didn't happen, there's no federal money, we get the whatever the standard per pupil increase would be, and then that would happen again 2 years from now. Is it reasonable to expect that there would be essentially a catch-up plus the regular per pupil increase the next time it comes to the budgeting process? Because that would ease our concern in terms of using one-time money to fund ongoing expenses and addressing some of the learning gap issues that Stacy has laid out for our priorities.
Okay, so a lot to unpack in the opening remarks. So if you don't mind, Todd, I'm going to back up just a step or two,
Yeah,
just to
please.
kind of, and then I'll dovetail it right into your specific question. So. First of all, thank all of you for your time to get involved. Believe me, I think we all know firsthand. It's oftentimes a thankless job, and no matter what you do, you're never going to please everybody, certainly. You know, I agree, Stacy. You know, my focus on the HOPE agenda, the heroin opioid prevention and education agenda is hugely important to me. Now that the budget is passed, we have a complete package of bills that will soon be coming out. And the sooner that we can catch some of these challenges, and sometimes, many times, in our schools when these kids are young before they get, you know, down the path of danger, if you will, the better off we all are. So I appreciate you know, acknowledging that that's the case. So this budget is unusual from the word go. I think we all would agree, because we're living in extraordinary times. This past year has been a year that we've all faced tremendous challenge. The uncertainty that you speak of, for example, as it relates even to school budgets. Every home in River Falls faced the same uncertainty. People, their employment, employers for that matter, are not immune, right? We're all facing many of the same challenges. And so I totally appreciate what we would consider to be the standard practice when it comes to maybe budgeting or fiscal management. But schools, just like everybody in our neighborhoods and in our community, are all facing unique and different times. So that has resulted in many of them having to do things differently than maybe they would have done in the past, and educational funding in this particular cycle wasn't all that different here. So, first of all, use of the federal funds has been certainly well debated, and I'm going to get to your question, because really that's where we'll get to how that rectifies itself going forward. These are monies, right, that one could argue our grandkids are going to be paying for. And I'm not here to debate whether the federal government, you know, did enough or not enough. That's, you know, that check's been written, you know, if you will. That's done at this point in time. But to not recognize this money, to pretend it wasn't there, also we felt as a finance committee would not have been us doing our job either, because the reality is that the funds are there. And so, and you know, the federal rules in terms of how they deploy those funds, Title I and certain other, you know, influences, may not necessarily have the same effect here. And I've had, you know, educators from this area call me up and say, why do we get penalized for what Milwaukee does wrong, or whatever the case may be? And that's not what we're not trying to we're not trying to fix those programs right now. What we're trying to do is get to a budget that is fiscally mindful, but yet also delivers within the classroom. I had prepared a presentation anticipating this kind of progressive walkthrough, beginning with the base, but use of the federal funds and the combination of state GPR dollars and the federal funds, and specifically, I think, and you mentioned mental health and some of the outcome of the COVID challenges. I mean, $12 million set aside for in a categorical for mental health. Another $7 million also for, I believe it's called, bear with me here one second, high cost special, school-based mental health services, $7 million, and then we also have another supplemental which doubles the program to $12 million for mental health. So when all is said and done, River Falls, when you exclude all federal monies, you'll be approximately 2.7% over last budget. When you include and recognize the federal funds, you would be 16.5% over last budget, last biennium. Now the question of one-time funds. So one of the things that we did in this budget, we recognize it. Now, Todd, specifically to your question, recognizing that there is the need to make sure that we have that hole filled budgetarily, right? We just passed an $87 billion budget, and we use numbers nowadays almost as though they're mythical and fictitious, but that's real money for our Wisconsin residents. Within that $87 billion, $550 million is basically just sitting in the general fund right now as a placeholder. That money will roll forward and be as a placeholder into the next budget. So that's the first part of the answer to your question in terms of when we look out. You asked it more specifically to say, is it reasonable to think that there could be a catch-up? We recognize that we're using federal monies in this budget. So I will give you my opinion. I'm not the co-chair of finance, so I can't speak with being definitive here, but it would be reasonable to me that absolutely we would recognize that we took advantage of the one-time federal monies, which, by the way, I just want to say this because there was a lot of phone calls I took from people in a pretty bad way. By doing that, we were able to send income tax relief to the largest bracket in the state of Wisconsin. And these families are also recovering right now. And that money is going to be very helpful to them. It goes retroactive to January 1st of this year. So we tried to strike the best balance possible, recognizing that we have the largest K-12 funding. Again, federal money is real money. It still will spend. With GPR or with the state funds in all of time. And we also were able to send some money back to the families in River Falls in this community who need it. So,
About how much will that be, do you think?
To the average
of tax
family,
relief?
Yep. So there's two parts to it. There's going to be the income tax of the third bracket, and there's also going to be $650 million in direct property tax relief. So the caveat could be if you're a homeowner, you would qualify for a little bit more, but it will range anywhere, depending upon income, between $1,000 and $1,500 per family who would be receiving those monies back. It equates to just over $3 billion.
Thank you for your response, too. But I'm wondering, could you also explain to us, and then we'll move on, about the component of maintenance of effort in terms of the federal funds that the states were responsible for allocating? Our understanding is there's this maintenance of effort. How does that play into this?
Yeah, so maintenance of effort required, the federal government required a certain amount of money as an overall percentage of your GPR budget to be allocated to education. And so while initially, and well publicized, certainly we were not in compliance, we knew in working with our Legislative Fiscal Bureau that our last motion, our last action would change that and bring us into compliance. So the final motion near final motion that was done in joint finance before was sent to the governor for his signature, addressed that. So the MOE completely resolved, not an issue. There's not going to be any concern. Fiscal Bureau has confirmed this for us as well with the state schools receiving that money.
So will that be a consistent policy across all of the states, or is that something unique to Wisconsin?
No, it's the same rule applies to all states.
It does?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
It's federal, so they control that.
Okay, good, thank you. My background in the next question is shorter, so you'll be happy with that. All right.
That's okay.
The next topic that we would like to talk about would be the funds that I'm going to call the ones that are not yet allocated. So our understanding, and we've done our best to do our homework, but it's complicated. Our understanding is that the state has about $2.6 billion in the budget stabilization fund, what some people might call a rainy day fund. Governor Evers vetoed the Joint Finance Committee's proposal to add another $550 million into that same fund. So although Joint Finance alluded to the potential to be able to use the funds to offset future school funding, what was part of your response to Todd, that was really never a firm commitment, that those funds would be designated for schools in the future. Our understanding is that the governor vetoed $450 million of that $550 and is directing about $100 million to schools on a per student basis. But once again, this is only one-time money. We like all the money that comes to us, but we particularly like it when it's ongoing money because it provides an additional layer of fiscal responsibility. So we're hoping to engage you in some conversations about that, and Amy has the questions.
So this first question is really easy. Is that an accurate summary of what she just said?
I'm going to clean it up just a little bit here.
You bet.
So first of all, the rainy day fund now sits at $1.6 billion, number one. Number two, the governor did veto a portion of that going into the rainy day fund. So essentially what it does is it lapses to the general fund. It just sits there. The only way that money can move is through legislative action. So for example, let's imagine for a moment that the Department of Public Instruction said, you know what, we've got to do something here. They would invoke what's called a 1310 hearing. Hearing comes to Joint Finance and they prepare a request, right? So we need $250 million, whatever it may be. Joint Finance can then take action, the full legislature can take action. There are a number of mechanisms and ways that money can still be utilized in this biennium, should it be needed. And not to forget, and one last clarification, the $100 million that you mentioned, those were federal monies that the governor directed. So he used the federal money, so did we. So that was not state dollars, those were federal dollars that were used as a supplemental to the state's overall educational fund.
Okay, so to clarify, the legislature could go back and use some of that 450 million?
We can,
Could not?
we can go back,
go back.
and should something catastrophic happen, we could also, the legislature can also invoke action to go into the rainy day fund, which is at 1.6 billion. So yes to both, I guess is my answer.
Okay, would you do that?
Would we do that? Well, I guess,
I mean, yes, would you do that?
in this, so would we do this? Should the situation be warranted, and again, we're in some bad situation, something adverse has happened, the state would absolutely take action. But what I would tell you is, if the question, I'm going to clarify here, if the question is like, right now, would we go ask for more money? The schools have more money than they've ever had before when we include the federal money, which is valid. So there's no action, that we don't see anything right now through the legislature that warrants any immediate action. And one last thing here. Governor Evers, outside of every number we've just talked about, he is still sitting on in excess of $1 billion of discretionary federal funds that he can deploy for anything he wants to at all. So should he, even without, he could circumvent the legislature with that amount of money. He could just say, I want to send, what's what he did with $100 million. I just want to send $100 million to education, and he did it. He could do that again next week, should he want to.
So for clarification about this, as far as the monies that we have received, we have gotten money, and we're really appreciative for it. It's also true that we've already had to spend some of that for masks, and for hand sanitizer, and for cleaning supplies, and for Wi-Fi, because we have a bunch of kids and families that don't have access to dependable Wi-Fi, and during the pandemic, we have needed to do that. We've also spent some dollars on people to provide social and emotional support for our kids and additional academic support. So some of those monies are, the federal government we're appreciative because they're compensating us for monies that we never anticipated having to expend for masks. So yes, we're getting money, but it was money that we've already had to spend, some of it, not all of it, but some of it.
So I want to thank Jamie Benson for, number one, always taking my phone calls, and during budget, I know I called a number of times. But to your point, we were talking about that, and so if we look at, for example, the 16.5% overall increase, you're right, there's a net out in there somewhere. Now, for this district in particular, during one of our last conversations, and the world could have changed a little bit, my understanding was, I think you had spent through ESSER 1, you were into ESSER 2, I don't know where you landed in ESSER 2 entirely, so that would leave some balance of ESSER 2, and the entire, ESSER 3 is the big one. ESSER 3 is the most substantial amount. So, one of the other things that, is it Chad Johnson? Is that Chad Johnson?
Chad?
Yeah.
Chad Smirava.
Okay. So one of the other things that we know to be true is that the amounts that we use to get to the 16.59% do not, the ESSER 2 is going to be larger for you. I don't know how much yet because we had to use an estimate, but from the information that we're having and conversations we're having, ESSER 2 will be larger than originally anticipated. But your point is accurate in the sense that the net increase of 16.5 is minus some percentage points below that. So we acknowledge that.
Okay, thank you. Did we get this one? Alan?
Yeah, I think you've answered it. Is there
Can I ask, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that you had said the way I understood it too is the governor's $100 million that was kind of earmarked, that didn't come off the 550 that originally had been proposed to be moved into so that 550 is still 550, it's
The
not
fi-
4, yeah, okay.
You
that's-
are
I just
correct.
want to make sure I understand.
Yes, you're correct. The 550 is still technically the full 550. The 100 million that he used was federal monies that he sent as a supplement to education.
So, just to pin you down, so that's why you're here, right? So we
Yeah.
can pin you down, right?
Yeah.
What's your personal opinion on revisiting that money, and should there be an additional allocation forthcoming?
Yeah.
To help us.
So if you give me just indulge me a couple extra seconds in my response. You know, I'm sitting in an audience of people who care tremendously about education, and I hope you know that I would be with you. And I could leave this building, I could drive to Hudson to Christian Community Homes, and I could talk and hear passionate stories about the need for healthcare monies, right? So there's always this difficult balancing act. My opinion is right now, in this moment, I see nothing so adverse to warrant an action to go get additional monies. There already are committed additional monies beyond, like I said, anything, and I have in my earlier slides, literally a progression of River Falls School District over the last 10 years. I look at special education. My opinion is, I couldn't believe that last budget was the first time we'd increased special education in nearly 8 or 10 years. That needed to get done. And in this particular cycle, we added to it. It's still hard, right? Because it takes $17 million to get 1 point gain. We'll crest 30% in year 2 of this budget. So my opinion would be, once again, should something adverse happen, and I hope I'm not back here having to revisit that or in finance and the capital doing that, I think the state would be on track. We've got, with the 550 still sitting in the general balance, we have a substantial rainy day fund. Revenue projections for the moment seem solid. Schools should be in a pretty good place through this biennium. And to Todd's question earlier about the next budget, I mean, that's why those things are there, to keep the overall spend at a level where we say, okay, this now we don't have the federal money anymore to go do this. So right now, Alan, I would say, there's no reason to take action on that. But if in 6 months there's a outbreak or there's something, then we have to do that. And just to add to something I know that you care about, because you've reached out to my office on this, the other thing that we've done that I am convinced we are not done improving and increasing is broadband. We did $125 million within joint finance. The governor's done $100 million, so you're at $225 net. I do believe, and I'm not Nostradamus, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see that number increase again as we go forward, because this situation only exacerbated the issue that we see with delivering information, whether it be for workforce or economic reasons or for educational purposes.
Thank you. We're going to get to that issue of special ed, but right now the topic is what I think legislators and at least we internally talk about as the financial cliff. So joint finance originally stated that $450 million would be placed into a fund to be used to offset the financial cliff that would occur in 2023-25 in that biennial cycle. Just to make sure we're on the same page, when people talk about a cliff, they mean what would happen to us financially as the result of no new state funds included in the 2021-23 school funding cycle. Typically, and we in our school district like to be very conservative when we are budgeting, but typically we imagine that there would be in the neighborhood of a $200 per pupil increase annually. So if the state relies on federal CARES and ESSER funds in the 2021-23 cycle to provide funding for schools, this one-time money would not provide a structural increase for schools in the 23-25 budget years, thereby creating this cliff. And that's what we're anxious to make sure you understand, and we would really be delighted if you could prevent that cliff. So we have a question about that, and Cindy.
Hi, Shannon. So exactly what Stacy's talking about, that if we're using one-time federal money to provide that structural ongoing budget expenses to meet those financial obligations, tell me a little bit about the conversation about the legislators. How did you expect the district to pay for these structural budget commitments moving forward once we do hit that cliff with the federal funds evaporating?
Right. So this is a slightly different spin on Todd's question, essentially, but I'll come. But I want to actually come at this one maybe from the inverse as well. So The short version is, once again, is we're using federal funds on a one-time basis. They're not there in the next biennium. There's your cliff, if you will. So let me do this in a reverse way. Let's say we would have done a typical, what has been typical anyway, 200 and 204 per pupil aid increase, and we would have just let the ESSERs go as is. I contend, and stay with me for a second here, we would have had a different kind of cliff, because what would have happened is schools would have had so much money and undoubtedly would have added programs and done a lot of great things with it, but it would have been at such a level that it was unsustainable in the next budget, and you just have a different form of cliff. So the cliff that you refer to and the way that we resolve this begins with the base $550 million sitting there on the general ledger, right? There's a start right there. What also happens every budget cycle, and one of the things when I got to Madison is I've lived in River Falls and just run business, so I keep looking at government through those lenses. And government many times, and what we argue for is we want absolution. And in the private sector, there's no such thing. Absolution does not exist, and really what we're finding is it doesn't exist in government. But we do manage budgets not all that different. And when we start a budget process, so let's fast forward to the next biennium. If it's education, we know we've got a balance of 550 to start with. Should we, we build there? Let's say we determine that's not enough. If it's not enough, then just like we do every budget cycle, you look at the overall state revenues or collections from tax, we determine the appropriation. I mean, for example, just as a little footnote here, whoops, it's on the earlier page, just as a percentage, K-12, the GPR portion of the K-12 budget in the state of Wisconsin against the entire GPR budget will be 38.7% in year one and 39.1% in year two. So all the GPR monies, K-12 is, let's just say by year two, 40% of that. So in the next budget, let's imagine that we say, hey, okay, we've got to do some more for education. It has to come from somewhere. And that happens every single budget cycle. So my answer in summary to you would be, starts with the 550. If that is not sufficient to take care of the obligations or the things that we strategically want to do when it comes to education, then there's going to be some other moving around that just has to happen. But that's not uncommon. It happens every single budget cycle in government, just like we did at the local business here.
You talked about the cliff, and you suggested that there would be a reverse cliff if we had received ongoing allocation for students at about $200 level, in addition to the funds from the federal government. I will predict that if that had happened, we actually in our district would have prevented that kind of a cliff, because we would have predominantly spent those dollars on one-time expenses. We would not have dedicated them to ongoing programming or people. Maybe I'm making a very clear distinction, and we would have had a little bit of gray space, likely, but I think for the most part, we would have prevented that in our district. So just something to keep in mind.
And just like we, as good taxpayers, would have trusted this board to take that action, be assured, using the one-time money, we recognize the next biennium in those same unique conditions.
Good. So I want to talk about special ed funding. So you've already gotten into this, but as you know, special education students, education for special education students is a really considerable expense for school districts. We recognize and appreciate the increase in special ed funding for our school district. It looks like right now we're going to be gaining about $80,000 in an increase over the next 2 years. And I want to say thank you for that and encourage your continuing advocacy. If you have a higher number for us, we'll take it. But right now, what I see here is 80,000.
I show 193,463 in year two.
So we'll take it. We'll take it. So Chad, did you hear that number? So, all right. But Bob has a question about this.
Shannon, thank you for coming this evening. What other budget support is in the is approved for schools this budget year? What other budget support has been approved for schools within this state budget?
What other budget support?
Other than the special education and.
Let me just clarify. Did you say you wanted that's under the special ed or just other categoricals?
Other than special education.
Other than category. Okay, so other categoricals. There is a lengthy list that I have here. So I'm not going to go through it all, but I'll give you then just some bullet points here. But in the omnibus motion where we went through this, backing up step, we have general aids, which is the bulk of what we've been talking about here. It's the core and the nucleus of your funding for education. And then we have categoricals, right? So these could be transportation costs, it could be special education, sparsity aid, critical incident mapping. Okay, so I'll give you a few of these that we did here. And again, this will be in a file that I leave with you all or I can send on. So you have we have not only the $86 million that was allocated for special education, which is, I believe, what equates to your 193, but we also added what's called high-cost special education, and I'm sure somebody here probably knows the broader definition better than I do, or what is entailed there, the description, but that's additional funds, which brings the reimbursement, historically was at 31%, that brings it up to 40%. So we didn't move heaven and earth, but we're headed in the right direction in that particular category. In addition, Bob, we added $12 million in aids for mental health categorical. So reflecting back on the last biennium, that's a double for those requiring different forms of mental health and how the schools may be able to use that. Another collaboration grant, mental health services for $7 million. We increased funding to libraries. That's, I think, important people. Sparsity aid, high-cost transportation, critical incident mapping. If you're not familiar, these are monies that schools can use to literally map out your school digitally so that in the case of an emergency situation, first responders, law enforcement can directly connect in and they know right where to go and where things may be happening that would require their attention. So that's something that was also. So all in, it was an increase of $128 million in the categoricals there, Bob. And like I said, those are the high point ones that I would say. There's a whole list here in that omnibus.
The 193 that you quoted in terms of additional special education funding, would part of that be from the high-cost special education funding that you're talking about, or no?
So my understanding, and I want to just make sure I clarify one thing here, that is our latest estimate working with Fiscal Bureau for River Falls School District. Okay. So there could be a little bit of wiggle on there, sure. So just know that. Number two, I believe that is not the high-cost special education. That would be just the core traditional special education. The high-cost special education is $4 million. So just to give, in versus $86 million that was for special education. Okay. So it's disproportionately weighted towards the traditional special education needs.
Okay, thank you.
Good. We're really appreciative of those things. I recognize we've taken a lot of your time, but we do have one last question that will go to Lindsay.
Shannon, I just want to echo the appreciation of the other board members here tonight. Thank you for being here. We just would like to give you an opportunity to discuss any other legislative decisions or school matters that you would like to share with us this evening.
I've generally, I hope Jamie would say this, even when I'm not here, had tried to be as transparent and straightforward as I can possibly be. Budgeting and legislation at the state is no different than how we operate many times in our homes and our communities. It's imperfect on its best day, and it's hard. And it is my belief, contrary to so much of the rhetoric these days and the news, there's more we agree on than we don't. And I want to just start with that, because I can tell you, and I won't name names because those representatives aren't here to speak to this, but I can tell you with the D's and with the R's, when we leaned back after we cleared it, I had a number of them say, the governor's signing this bill, and he did. And that usually is a testament when, we got something in the area code of what everybody could live with here. But since I've got you, I want to just share a couple other things that I've been working on. The superintendent in Hudson, Nicolette, reached out to me probably a year and a half, it's probably been 2 years ago now, okay, so just pre-COVID, and we were talking about long-term improvements in sustainable funding, some of the challenges and so forth that education faces. And I think Nick's got some ties, or he's from Iowa. Either way, he pointed me to this Iowa program called SAVE. It's Secure and Advanced Vision for Education. bipartisan legislation that was introduced and went through, and what it has done is it has created a sustainable model for many parts of the infrastructure that schools have to address and deal with, and what it has avoided and resulted in is substantially less referendums. And it also provides property tax relief to the Iowa residents, in some cases 30+%. So it has real money to people who own homes in that state. So I reached out to Representative John Mako, who chairs Ways and Means. John has a business and financial background. I'll just share this with you. We're working on other things. The same thing that got us here isn't going to get us there, and we know and we recognize that. So, part of when I look at this, and I also think, just very candidly and transparently, I think that there's things that we've been doing that it's high time we challenge them a little bit, right? I think that there's efficiencies that can be gained. I think COVID also showed us alternative and efficient models for operating and delivering education. We do it in the private sector, right? I mean, I got my Delta Diamond badge on my bag because I have flown over 1 million miles. I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. And so the world is changing around us, and we need to take those lessons and apply them so we can do it more efficiently, because tax collections are somebody's money, and that's never lost on me. And I'll tell you this, I've talked to some great conservatives who are really conservative until it's something that they want, and then the world changes for them. So I think you're going to see more in the area of alternative proposals, and we're going to get to committees, and there's work that was done, for example, in the Blue Ribbon Education Commission, if you followed up on that. I mean, they called out to the point that it's time we look at the funding formula for the state of Wisconsin, and I think they're right. I don't have the answer here today, but that committee, that group, I think will help us get to the right answer so that we can be efficient but still deliver world-class education. As you mentioned, you're going to continue to see an assortment of HOPE agenda related bills out of my office alone. My office is going to be working on, we're leading the charge once again. I think we're going to get something done here because I know this is of interest to the governor. Data privacy. This is also something that I think is important, and I'm keenly aware that some of our public schools in the state of Wisconsin have been compromised at times, and we need to make sure that we are also defending our critical and sensitive data within our schools as well. So I could go on, but those are just some of the highlights of some things that I'm going to be working on. I know in the upcoming session, and reach out. That's all I can say. Just reach out. I mean, Jamie, you really are. You do a great job. If I miss you on the call, you're back to me within minutes, and it's always so helpful. There's teachers in this district that I speak with on a regular basis, and I'm grateful to them as well. I think we've got a great school. My boys graduated from here. My grandkids are all going to school here in this district. You guys are doing a good job.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for explaining. Anything you can do to help us get more clarity about what the budget is. It was, I'll just tell you, a fair amount of research to be able to come up with just an understanding of what's going on for tonight.
Right.
And we had to make some decisions. So if you could help people get that out. Another thing that you could think about if you don't have enough to do is let's look at the funding formula, the school funding formula, in terms of getting some new ideas about appropriate ways of making sure that our taxpayer money is used well and schools are supported. So in your spare time.
Yeah, I think that when I was shocked to learn how much of $1 of education money actually makes it to River Falls School District or our school districts, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed. It's not your problem, it's a Madison issue, but it still needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
Because more of that money is better for the taxpayer. We can be more efficient and friendly to the taxpayers, and also in doing so help our schools out as well. And then finally, on your clarification piece, I know that the feds have put off this exhaustive matrix of what you can spend and what you can't spend. Call the office. Legislative Fiscal Bureau is an outstanding resource to us. They're essentially the state's accountants, and they know how to decipher all this stuff. So you already have, but continue to do so.
Yep, we'll continue to do that. You can take back too that we like every dollar. We really like the ones that are ongoing, but we will graciously accept any that you send our way.
Stacy, if I could add one more thing. When you're talking about resources, you've mentioned him several times tonight, but we would hope that you would continue to use Jamie Benson as a resource here. Mm-hmm. He's a very experienced superintendent. He knows the state. He knows the business. He has a lot of trust from this board and this community in him, and I'm glad that you connect with him, but I would encourage you to continue to use him as a solid resource on what's going on in the schools and where we are. So
yeah, I appreciate you reaching out to me, Shannon. As you referenced, I can confirm that Shannon has reached out. I appreciate that you ask how things would impact us here locally, and certainly not that we're going to agree on all things at all times, but I appreciate the outreach, so thank you.
You bet.
So thanks for being here.
And keep
Thank
up the
you
great
very
job
much.
in the technical programs. I love that work. You're helping to resolve our workforce issues, so keep that going.
Well, next time we'll invite you to come back for another tour because there's even more good stuff since you were here last time for the tour. So,
I look forward to it. Thank
all
you very
right,
much.
thanks. All right.
Stacy, can I say, sorry, I don't mean to bring up the university at this time, but if it was all right, I just want to say that I don't know exactly how all the support went down, but I'm sure you had a big hand in securing the funding for the university. And as somebody who listened to Rick Bowen tell basketball recruits year after year that there'd be a new athletic facility for about 20 years, it was nice to see that. I appreciated that. Side note to everything that we've talked about here, so
yeah,
that's a big deal.
You know, and collaboration between, and I know you're already doing it. I know you're already collaborating with the technical colleges and like with the university as well. Yeah, that the science, technology, engineering. I mean, there's a lot of people. You wouldn't be shocked. Call me up and say, "Why are we building another building?" This is a high demand category in industry today. We have to fulfill it because we want those jobs here. And yeah, it was. I want to make sure that in response, my appreciation to the Cerno houses, the local businesses, the university leadership, former Chancellor Dean Van Galen, Beth Schomer. You know, I can say that I had a part in it, but I really give the appreciation and thanks to them as well. But it's going to be great to have that resource here in this town.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
That's great.
That
That's
thank
good.
you.
Lots of good things.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay, so we are going to move on, and we will be talking about superintendent and administrative reports, and the first one goes to Jamie.
I just wanted to give a preliminary school district report on our plans for the upcoming school year, all things COVID related. And so I'm calling it preliminary, I'm calling it tentative, and when it does come before the board in August for final approval, we'll have those asterisks and disclaimers at that time, I'm sure, that also says unless things change regarding COVID transmission and so on. But just to give a quick overview, we intend to continue with our current summer school practice of optional masks. We intend to make some changes with our cohorting groups. Specifically, you know, we'll try and do some cohorting at certain times with our elementary schools, if that's at lunchtime or in a music class and so on. But in reality, the cohorting and keeping small groups of children together in an elementary class, the reason I'm not referring to middle school and high school is because those students change when they go from first hour to second hour. They may very well be in a different class with a different group of students. So cohorting has been more specific to the elementary, and we will not have those same kind of practices in place this coming school year. We'll do what we can, as I mentioned, during a music class or during lunch to try and continue with some of our mitigation efforts. The key for all of this is really going to be to preserve as much of the layering of mitigation efforts as we can. And so when we think in terms of multiple layers of mitigation, two of the big mitigation efforts are masking. And so we're saying that's optional. You don't have to do that. Another is with regard to close contact tracing. That one remains to be seen, somewhat debatable. I'll tell the board and the public listening, there's really, where we're at, I think, is two options. Number one, close contact tracing. If you are in contact in a classroom at school with someone who has tested positive, that's what that's about, then historically we were at this 6 feet rule. If you were within 6 feet of that person, that you would be identified as a close contact, you'd be quarantined. That meant go home for 10 days. Originally it was 14. The 10-day rule said you could come back a little early, you could come back on day 8 if you tested negative, and so on. We're still debating that one a bit. We know that we're down to 3 feet The board made that decision at the same time that you did the optional masks. We went from 6 feet to 3 feet. We frankly, knock on wood, we are not seeing significant spread or transmission of COVID during summer school. We're not seeing it in our community. We're not seeing it in our county or our region right now. And so we're a little open-ended yet, admittedly, on what will line up with the close contact tracing. But as I said, we're down to 2 options. One is the 3-foot rule. The other option is we'd identify and we would inform parents by an email or letter that said, someone in your child's class has tested positive for COVID. We're advising that you may want to keep an eye on your child's symptoms, keep them home if they're ill, etc., but no mandatory quarantine. So that's the debate, 3-foot rule or send a letter home to parents. Other things, we'll continue to have a COVID room in the event that we have symptomatic children. We want to keep them separated in the first aid health room from students that might be there for their medications, might be in there for some other illness. We're redefining the criteria that was used for symptoms last year. I'll use the example, if you had a headache and a cough, you may have automatically been identified as having COVID symptoms. We're leaning more in a direction of you would have to have, in order to be identified and as symptomatic, and we would call your parent and ask that you go home and so on, that we'd be looking at symptoms more like pre-COVID, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, etc. We're still working with our school nurse on some of those things. We heard some comments earlier about the parent option for student testing. The reason we asked the board to table it tonight is that we just don't have enough information. There's a vendor option, so that no matter what, we would not ask the board to approve anything that didn't first require parental decision-making. So this decision, in my mind, would be left up to parents ultimately. But we also have, we're blessed in this community that we have, 3 clinics now and a hospital where testing can be done. And so the main reason in my mind why we are even debating whether we would provide the parents an option for that test to be done in school has to do with equity. It has to do with providing opportunities to help parents that might have a problem getting off of work, a problem with transportation, or have other family circumstances that don't make it as accessible for them to get tested. And there may be a way for us to, again, leave that opportunity and that choice in the hands of parents. We'll see. We're gathering more information on that.
Thank you. Do we have any administrative reports?
No other administrative reports.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you to also give us the update on Equity, Inclusivity, and Diversity Committee.
Just very briefly, I think I once might have mentioned to the board we were shooting for a meeting in July, but we're going to do that in August, and the main focus for 21-22 school year will be, to be very clear, we will continue to have the work of the EID committee to focus first and foremost on the district's mission and the district's priorities. But at this August meeting, they will focus on some kind of group norms and kind of recalibrate the work of that committee and establish some goals that they have for the coming school year. So that date will be in August.
Thank you. At this point, we're going to move on to action items. Before the board this evening, we have minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting on June 21st. We have minutes from the June 28th Special Board of Education meeting. We have bills that have been submitted for payment. We also have recommendations regarding employment. So at this point, do we have a motion to approve minutes, bills, and employment as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Amy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Cindy. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. Now we will move to letter C, which is a consideration and action recommended by the Educational Program Committee, and I'll turn to Alan.
Yeah, we had a really good meeting on the 12th, a week ago tonight at Greenwood, and this kind of continued our process of trying to get into all of the buildings at various times to see what's there, to get some ideas to what the classrooms configurations are. Certainly some of the work that was done in the last referendum and seeing how that's being used. So it was nice to see Greenwood, and I appreciate Dr. Sherman giving us a tour of the building and showing us around a little bit. We had a very good meeting in terms of conversation generally. A lot of this was informational, which is an opportunity for us to have conversation and discuss things, especially with staff and with each other about things. So some of this was somewhat pro forma. Jennifer presented our academic standards public notice that goes out each year, part of Act 55 from the state. This is going to go to our, Jennifer, is this going to come to the a regular board meeting for approval, or this was just for information for us? Because we didn't act on it as a committee.
That's right there. It's coming up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, that's coming up later. All right. So, my apologies. We're going to act on that later. I didn't see it down here further. We had a really good conversation about the Loudy system. 1 year into it, this is to replace the class rank and issues and valedictorian, salutatorian. We made this change, like many high schools, to a different system. We're still shaking out the bugs on that, and I think that we had a very good conversation with Kit Lutke, the high school principal, about where that is now, where it might be in 2 or 3 years, and some of the implications about that, and there'll be some follow-up information on it. Very good conversation, and I think it helped us learn a lot more about what's going on in the high school as well. Another high school presentation was Principal Lutke, Melissa Hansen from the counseling office, and Chad Leonard, who was one of our teachers, but unfortunately has left us this year, but he still hung around this summer working on this project on collecting data on the college and career readiness process that we're implementing in the high school. And we're one of the few high schools in our school districts in the state that is implementing this. Some very good information about how we measure students in terms of their readiness to reach the workforce and all of that. And there'll be more information coming out on this. In fact, I think this is going to be a good follow-up for a future presentation with people like Representative Zimmerman here tonight, because I think they're going to like this, how we do both the academic preparation but also the career preparation for students. We also had a very good conversation led by David Bell, help from Nate Wells and Jennifer Peterson, about our current board policy on how controversial issues are handled in our classrooms and how our teachers handle those. I think the policy surrounding that and the conversation around that, and eventually the work that's going to be done with the teachers, between the teachers, in support of each other and the teachers, on how we deal with issues in terms of teaching in the classroom is a good one. Very good conversation there. And then we had some handbook changes that we'll deal with tonight that just were updates and things on the handbooks from the middle school, elementary, the Renaissance Academy. We'd done the high school, I think, the previous week, previous month. Right? So, having said that, I'm going to, yes. So we have two items to approve tonight. The academic standards public notice and approval of the handbook changes. And if it's okay, I would move that we move as a full board to approve both of those, unless you'd like to break them out.
It's just fine. So you've made that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Bob. Any discussion?
The high school handbook says there's still revisions to the dress code. The middle school one does not say that, so is that final in the middle school? Because it looks like it's connected to the old one in the high school.
My understanding is that once the new policy is ready, that they will be consistent. Am I correct in that? Between middle school and high school? Yes, and so that if there were to be a change, then it would be put into the middle school and the high school handbook. These are online documents, and so it's an easy thing for us to come back and make a change. Anything else? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried.
Stacy, one more thing. I just want to thank those administrators who are here tonight and the other staff who had a hand in those handbook changes. I know that's always an issue each year to get at that and update that. So thanks to those folks who are here tonight.
And for creating one for the e-school. All right, do we have any proposed or suggested items for future agendas? All right, then we are going to schedule next meetings. The Educational Program Committee will meet Monday, August 2nd at 6 o'clock in the district office conference room. Finance and Facilities will meet Monday, August 9th at 6 o'clock. Is that for sure in the Media Center?
Yes.
Yes, okay, it'll be in the Media Center. Do we want to change that? Right now, we're scheduling it for the Media Center, but everybody pay attention because it might adjust. The Personnel Committee will follow on August 9th at 6:30, again, tentatively in the Media Center. The next regular board meeting will be Monday, August 16th at 6 o'clock here in the auditorium. There will be a new teacher meet and greet Monday, August 23rd, 4 to 5:30 at Juniors. That's how that works. And at this point, I would like to have a request to move into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 1985 1E, F, and G. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Cindy. A second?
A second.
Thank you, Amy. I need a roll call. Alan?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
I'm saying yes. Todd?
Yes.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yep.
Bob?
Yes.
And we are now in executive session. Thank you, everyone. We are going to reconvene in the Media Center.
Your point was finance and personnel could just be held in central office.
Why not?
I sent data away.
All right. Okay.
Where are we at with the timeline?
Stacy was keeping it tight.
You can correct that.
I didn't know if it was appropriate to say anything about the university. I'm sorry if it wasn't. I didn't want to have to reach out to him separately, and I figured Cindy was I saw your foot twitching.